Early this century, decades before road and rail transport was developed, much of Australia's rural produce, such as wheat and wool, was transported to the major ports by sailing ship. In some states, such as South Australia, the trading ketches became the lifeblood of the growing country centres, and returning with their back cargoes of building materials and fertiliser, they allowed the opening up of many new areas for farming. The arrival of the ketches was a major event in the remote communities along the coast, and it seems the memories live on. This month, one of those original ketches, the Falie, is retracing the old trading route as part of South Australia's 150th anniversary celebrations. Tonight, she's at Robe, just near the South Australian-Victorian border, and by the time she finishes her voyage next Monday, she will have called at over 30 ports, collecting her cargo of hand-sown and hand-harvested grain. From the Falie, Ian Doyle reports.
There were dozens of ketches like this plying the waters off the coast of South Australia at the turn of the century. They carried wool and wheat and livestock and just about anything else that had paid. The Falie is the last one left. She's now owned by the people of South Australia. The restoration started about 2 years ago, and $1.4 million and tens of thousands of work hours later, well, here she is.
Watch your sheets.
The Falie was built in Holland, launched in 1920. She cost the Spencer Gulf Transport Company the grand sum of £3,600. Over the past 66 years, she's been a regular visitor to grain ports in southern Australia. She took part in the New Guinea campaign in World War II, and on the night of May 31st, 1942, the Falie is credited with helping to sink one of the midget submarines attacking Sydney Harbour. Everything about this ketch makes her worthy as the flagship for South Australia's Jubilee 150 celebrations. She's had many masters. At the helm for the grain trade reenactment is Captain Alan Workman.
They weren't sleek liners, but they were, some of them would sail. There were a very varied amount of them, and some were good sailors, others were nothing but tubs, really, I guess.
What's this one like?
All right, she sails well and handles well.
How much nostalgia is wrapped up in all of this?
Well, a great deal. And you can see some of the old guys on the wharf with tears in their eyes, the guys that lumped grain and the people that remembered the ketches in the old days. And it's very important to them that their children and grandchildren can see that era that's no longer with us.
The ketches were the lifelines for country South Australia. Their heyday was in the mid-20s. Rail and road transport and steamships that could keep more or less to a timetable gradually took their place. But for a time, sail was supreme. Things were done differently then. Most of the work was manual and horsepower had some meaning. All the grain was bagged and it had to be lumped from paddock to dray, from dray to wharf and from wharf to ship. Wheat stacks, 2 stories high and stretching as far as the eye could see, were a common sight.
For the past 7 weeks, country people in South Australia have been wallowing in a sea of nostalgia. The grain trade reenactment has allowed the older generations to take time to reflect on days gone by, and the younger generation to take part in a piece of living history. The restoration of the Falie has made it all possible.
Right, pick up.
Every country town had a different way of celebrating. authenticity was aimed for and achieved. Strippers and winnowers, still in working order, were dusted down, oiled and given a coat of paint. It was as if whole communities had taken a step back into the so-called good old days. Yarns were swapped of drought and flood and fire, and lies were told about the biggest crop, the best horse team, and the most wheat winnowed in a day. But no one seemed to mind. More than anything else, the reenactment has to do with people, bag sowers and wheat lumpers. Blokes like Jim Cronin, who in the 1950s was a member of the elite Cummins crew, a gang of lumpers revered as the best in Australia.
Thinking back, they were the toughest men that I have ever known. They were absolutely, there's guys that come to my mind. I remember the first day we shifted out 4,000 bags in a working day, which took us about 7 hours. That was really something because no one else had ever done it. But then it went on, we never got less than that. Day after day, over 4,000 bags out of the stack.
How quickly would you move them?
Well, the man up in the truck would have to lump at 26 bags a minute. That's over 2 tonne a minute. They never got any spell at that. They just went in hour after hour, and we had to be fit to stand up there and keep throwing those bags around. It certainly knocked me around. Me, myself, I busted my diaphragm and bags fell on my head and kinked my neck and had repercussions. I busted the bottom of my spine and twisted my knee and how many more other things that can happen to a person. It wasn't easy, and sometimes the trucks would be wet. You'd lump the first bag in the morning, there'd be oil on the bottom of the railway truck, and down you'd go with the bag on top of it. You had to get up, carry on as if nothing happened. But in one particular year in the early 50s, the basic wage was about £10 a week. We were earning £100 a week, £120 a week. None of the wheat lumbers that I lumped with can say they're rich now. They all spend the money virtually as quick as they earned it, but they went in wheat lumping so that they'd get this money to be able to do something, but it never sort of got them out of a groove.
They say nowadays the Australian dream is to own your own home. Well, I think it was then to own your own land.
Jim's brother, Pat Cronin, was a bag sower and one of the best. He's lost a bit of his speed, but the technique is something you never forget. A good tally for a day was 500. Pat Cronin has sown 641. They reckon you were the best that's ever been.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. That's pretty contentious, I think. It's, I haven't heard of anyone saying more than 641 a day, but I guess there are guys around that did. But I'll say best locally. I was only a boy in those days. It's pretty hard to get a start, but an old chap came to me once and said that he couldn't help me a lot financially, but he'd give me some good advice. And the advice was that you needed 3 things to do any good in this life, and the first one, you had to have an ambition. Secondly, once you established your ambition, you need an alarm clock. And thirdly, you had to have perseverance. I think a young fellow thinks of an awful lot of things. Got a job to keep his mind on the job, but I had a clock up the end of the bags. That used to keep me on the job. But you had to discipline yourself, and hands were bleeding some nights when you knock off, and back was aching. But the fact that I was able to earn probably 5 times the basic wage by working on piecework, about 7 pence a bag, that just drove me on to the realisation of my dream.
Pat and Jim Cronin's dream was to own a piece of land. That dream eventually came true. When bulk handling replaced the bags, it signalled the end for the catchers and the men who bagged and lumped the wheat. The Cronin brothers are survivors, but in 1986 they're disillusioned with what's happening around them. They no longer see any future on the land. The piece of ground they fought so hard to buy last month was put up for sale. But thoughts of today's rural crisis were put to one side the day the Falie came in.
1, 2.
Thank you.
big welcome to Venus Bay on behalf of the Jubilee Committee in this area and the people assembled here today.
Wherever the Falie tied up, country people flocked just to be part of the occasion. The celebration started early and in many places went on well into the night. The single most tangible link with the grain trade of the past are the scores of jetties that dot the South Australian coastline. Many played their part in the reenactment. It's not until you see a wagon laden with wool and wheat being drawn by a Clydesdale, albeit at a leisurely pace, that the real significance of these sometimes forgotten timber structures becomes obvious.
Right, take it away.
The bags of grain loaded at each port of call will be milled and made into Jubilee cake, most of which will be consumed by their city cousins. The Falie is now being called the Grand Old Lady of the Sea. The restoration was made possible by generous private and various company sponsorships and $900,000 from the Commonwealth Employment Program. A lot of work was done by volunteers. Until 4 years ago, she was carrying general cargo between Adelaide and Kangaroo Island for her previous owners, Fricker Brothers. In the restoration of the Falie, what was the most important thing you had to take into account?
Well, it was remarkable that Falie had been viable as a cargo carrier for so long, but it was clear at the end of her time with Frickers that there was no viability in straight cargo. And also as a community ship, we want her available to the community, so we wanted to put passengers on. And sail trainees we were looking at as well. Now, you can't put passengers on without complying with surveys, so below decks we fitted her out in the most modern way and the safest way so that she complies with all safety standards.
Jamie Mackenzie is a cordon bleu chef who's worked in five-star restaurants, outback sheep stations and prawn trawlers in the Gulf. Below decks, she was an obvious choice. Finding a crew for above deck was another matter altogether. There were plenty of volunteers, but few had a working knowledge of sails. The project committee eventually came up with an interesting mix of people with the necessary experience. On shore, they're milkmen, mechanics and magistrates. Captain Alan Workman is, however, a real captain, and Engineer Bill Wren is a real Royal Australian Navy engineer. He came out of retirement and volunteered his time to rebuild the engine. For him, the smells and sounds are just like old times.
I always say this to everybody, once you go crazy, it doesn't worry you. You can only go crazy. Noisy, very noisy. It was just like trains passing your house every night if you live near a railway line. You get accustomed to it. Some of those real old skippers and the old engineers that used to keep these vessels going, it's been a credit to them over a period of a long time.
There have been problems with the engine, but for all of that, the Falie is yet to face her greatest test. It won't be known until next year, after the initial euphoria surrounding the ketch has ebbed, whether the $1,200 a day running cost will be met with uniform enthusiasm by the people of South Australia. At this early stage, Andrew Cannon believes the Falie's services will be in demand.
And we expect after 86 she'll be available for the community for charter-type use. We also expect involvement with the Grand Prix in one form or another, probably with the America's Cup. And also 1988, of course, there's the tall ships in Sydney. There's a great interest in the community in ships of this sort, and this is the first in Australia, so we expect she'll be very busy and accessible to the people of South Australia. Any ship to keep going, they're very expensive, has got to be economically viable. The reason this ship's still available is that she's always been economically viable, and in restoring her, we've had an eye to that to make sure she's as versatile and useful as possible for the future. And she'll have to pay away or else she won't survive. That's the way of ships and the sea.
That report from Ian Doyle.